Dear viewers, today we bring you a story that will leave you speechless and make you question everything you believe about love and destiny. A struggling young black man from Detroit married an 85-year-old wealthy African-American businesswoman, but just 7 days after their courthouse wedding, when he arrived at her mansion in Beverly Hills to fulfill their marriage obligations, what he discovered was beyond imagination. The way this elderly woman moved, her glowing skin, and her vibrant energy made her appear no different from a 20-year-old college student. But the real shock came when Jamal made a decision that nobody saw coming. Jamal Washington was a 25-year-old man carrying the weight of his entire family on his shoulders after his father's sudden death from COVID-19 complications that devastated so many black families across America. The whole family had become dependent on him overnight. His mother, Gloria, was battling diabetes and high blood pressure, conditions that disproportionately affect the black community, and all their savings had been drained paying for her expensive medications and frequent ER visits. His younger sister, Keisha, was in her senior year at Howard University, and her tuition fees, textbooks, and living expenses had become an unbearable burden. At just 25 years old, life had aged him beyond his years. The stress lines on his face and the constant worry in his eyes showed a man who had been forced to grow up too fast. Day and night, Jamal worked multiple jobs, driving for DoorDash and Uber during the day, working security at a downtown Detroit office building at night, and doing weekend construction work, just to keep his family afloat. The weight of responsibility had stolen his youth, and debt collectors from various payday loan companies called his phone constantly, sometimes threatening legal action if payments weren't made immediately. One scorching summer afternoon in downtown Detroit, Jamal stopped at a soul food restaurant to buy some fried chicken and mac and cheese, one of the few affordable meals he could manage. He counted the crumpled dollar bills in his wallet, calculating if he had enough for a proper meal. That's when his eyes met those of a woman sitting in a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, staring at him intently through the tinted windows. This was no ordinary woman. Her name was Mrs. Dorothy Williams, and in the business world of America, she was a legend. Her empire spanned real estate, technology, entertainment, and logistics across the United States and internationally. Her expensive designer clothing, heavy diamond jewelry, and commanding presence immediately caught Jamal's attention. The way other customers and even the restaurant owner bowed respectfully when they noticed her car told him everything he needed to know about her status. Mrs. Dorothy stepped out of her vehicle, her chauffeur quickly opening the door. Despite being 85 years old, she moved with surprising grace and authority. She approached Jamal with a knowing smile and asked in a refined voice that carried traces of Southern roots, "You are Jamal Washington, aren't you?" Jamal was stunned. He replied hesitantly, "Yes, ma'am, that's me. But how do you know my name?" She studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "I know everything about your situation, young man. I know about your mother's medical bills, your sister's Howard University tuition, and the debts that are drowning your family. I know you work 3 jobs and haven't had a proper night's sleep in months." Jamal's heart began racing. "Ma'am, who are you? How do you know so much about my personal life?" Mrs. Dorothy smiled mysteriously. "If you want, I can change your destiny completely. There is only one condition: you must marry me." The words hit Jamal like a lightning bolt. The busy Detroit streets seemed to go silent around him. "Ma'am, what did you just say? You want me to marry you?" "This is not a joke, young man," she said calmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making multi-million-dollar decisions. "This is a serious business proposal. If you agree to marry me, I will personally handle your mother's medical treatment at the best private hospitals in the country. I will pay your sister's remaining Howard tuition and ensure she gets a prestigious job after graduation. I will clear all your family debts and give you a life of comfort you have never imagined. Jamal felt dizzy. The Detroit summer heat seemed to intensify. Ma'am, what would I have to do in return? Simple, Mrs. Dorothy replied immediately. Marry me according to legal standards. There will be proper documentation, everything legitimate and binding. After marriage, you will have your freedom to live as you choose, but there are certain conditions you must follow. Her words sounded too good to be true, but the desperation in Jamal's situation made him listen carefully. Without another word, Mrs. Dorothy handed him an elegant business card with gold lettering and walked back to her Rolls-Royce. As her convoy of 3 luxury cars disappeared into Detroit traffic, Jamal stood there holding the card, wondering if he had just experienced a miracle or stumbled into a trap. Days passed, but the pressure from creditors intensified. One evening, loan sharks came to their small apartment in Detroit's East Side, threatening to seize their few belongings if payment wasn't made within 48 hours. His mother's condition worsened, and the hospital refused to continue treatment without immediate payment. His sister called, crying that she might be suspended from Howard for unpaid fees. That night, Jamal made his decision. He called the number on Mrs. Dorothy's card. Within 2 days, everything was arranged. The legal marriage ceremony took place at the Los Angeles County Courthouse, with prominent politicians, entertainment moguls, and business leaders in attendance. The documentation was completed with proper witnesses and legal representation. For the first time in his life, Jamal stepped into a world of unimaginable luxury. The Beverly Hills mansion was an architectural masterpiece, marble floors imported from Italy, crystal chandeliers from Europe, artwork worth millions of dollars, and staff who moved like shadows, anticipating every need. The estate was so large it had its own security gate, guest houses, and quarters for domestic staff. The household staff, mostly young beautiful women from various backgrounds, treated Mrs. Dorothy with reverence bordering on fear. Even the most senior staff members, some who had worked for her for over 20 years, still addressed her as Mrs. Williams and never made direct eye contact unless spoken to first. Jamal noticed that when these women spoke to him, they kept their responses brief and formal, as if afraid that any friendliness might offend their employer. As the days passed, Jamal began to notice strange things about the mansion. On the second floor, there was a heavy oak door with multiple electronic locks that was always sealed. Private security personnel were positioned near that area 24/7, and whenever Jamal asked about it, the staff would simply say, "Mr. Washington, that area is restricted to Mrs. Williams only." The relationship between Jamal and Mrs. Dorothy was cordial but distant. She was often busy managing her business empire, taking calls from Wall Street, London, and Tokyo, flying in private jets to board meetings across the country. When they did interact, conversations were formal and brief. She would inquire about his comfort and well-being, but they never discussed personal matters or attempted to know each other on a deeper level. Every evening, they would dine together in the grand dining room, served by silent staff on expensive china. Neither of them ever initiated personal conversations. It felt like two strangers sharing space rather than a married couple. Mrs. Dorothy would often watch Jamal during these meals, her eyes holding secrets he couldn't decipher. One night, as Jamal walked through the mansion's corridors, he noticed lights coming from Mrs. Dorothy's private wing, an area of the house where no one else was permitted. Curiosity overtook caution, and he moved closer. Through a slightly open window, he could hear Mrs. Dorothy speaking to someone on the phone, her voice filled with emotion he had never heard before. The conversation was intense, almost argumentative, but he couldn't make out the words clearly. What disturbed him most was the tone. It wasn't the voice of an 85-year-old woman, but someone much younger, filled with passion and energy. His heart began pounding as questions flooded his mind. Who was she talking to at this hour? What secrets was she hiding? Was this marriage really what it seemed? Standing there in the darkness, Jamal realized that everything about his situation felt orchestrated, planned. The way she had known so much about his personal life, the timing of their meeting, the immediate solutions to all his problems, it was all too convenient, too perfect. That night he made a decision. He would find a way into that locked room and discover the truth, no matter the consequences. His opportunity came through Aisha, Mrs. Dorothy's personal assistant, a stunning 24-year-old woman from Atlanta who had worked for the family for 3 years. Unlike the other staff, Aisha seemed more approachable, and Jamal sensed she might have answers to his questions. One evening, Jamal approached Aisha as she was organizing documents in the study. "Aisha, I need to ask you something important. I want to spend time with my wife privately, but I don't know the proper protocol in this house." Aisha looked surprised but pleased. "Mr. Washington, Mrs. Williams has been waiting for you to make this request. She speaks about you often when you're not around. She will be very happy. Can you arrange for me to visit her private quarters tonight?" Aisha's face lit up. "I will ask her immediately, sir." Within minutes, Aisha returned with permission. "Mrs. Williams says you should come to her room at 10 p.m. She is very excited, sir." That evening, Jamal prepared himself mentally. If he was going to uncover the truth about Mrs. Dorothy and this mysterious marriage, tonight would be his chance. He approached her door with a mixture of nervousness and determination. When Mrs. Dorothy opened the door, Jamal was shocked by her appearance. Gone was the formal businesswoman he had known. She stood before him wearing elegant silk loungewear, her skin glowing with a radiance that seemed impossible for someone her age. Her movements were fluid, graceful, almost youthful. The transformation was so dramatic that for a moment, he questioned whether this was the same 85-year-old woman he had married. "Jamal, my dear," she said, her voice softer and more melodious than he had ever heard it. "I have been hoping for this moment since our wedding day." The room was filled with the scent of expensive perfumes and candles. Soft jazz music played in the background, and the lighting created an intimate atmosphere that made the space feel magical rather than intimidating. "Mrs. Dorothy," Jamal said, still amazed by her appearance, "you look incredible. How is this possible? You seem like a completely different person." She smiled mysteriously and moved closer to him. "Age is just a number, my dear boy. When a woman loves truly and deeply, her soul becomes timeless. I haven't just made you heir to my wealth and properties, I have made you the owner of my heart." Jamal sat on the elegant sofa, and Mrs. Dorothy gracefully sat beside him. The formal distance they had maintained since their wedding seemed to dissolve in the intimate setting of her private space. "I never imagined," she continued, "that at this stage of my life, someone would look at me the way you do, with respect, with kindness. Most young men your age would see only my money and my age." Jamal found himself genuinely moved by her vulnerability. "Mrs. Dorothy, I admit I came into this marriage for practical reasons, but being here with you now, seeing this side of you, I realize there's so much I don't know about who you really are." There was moisture in her eyes as she spoke. "I have waited my entire life for someone to see beyond my wealth and power. I have loved before, I have lost before, but my heart still beats with hope." Jamal reached for her hand, surprised by how soft and warm it was. "Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Dorothy. Not the businesswoman everyone fears and respects, but the real you." "When you call me your wife," she whispered, "I am not defined by my age or my money, but by this moment, this connection between us. Stay in this moment with me, Jamal, and I will show you a love unlike anything you have ever experienced." As the night deepened, the sounds of Beverly Hills faded into the distance, and the mansion grew quiet around them. In the soft candlelight, the years seemed to melt away from Mrs. Dorothy's face, and Jamal found himself seeing her not as an elderly woman who had saved his family, but as someone deserving of genuine affection and companionship. "Your heartbeat," she said, placing her hand on his chest, "it's steady and strong. That strength gives me hope that this marriage can become something real." "Mrs. Dorothy," Jamal replied softly, "I came here tonight with questions and suspicions, but now I just want to understand you better. You've shown me kindness I didn't expect." She moved closer, her eyes reflecting decades of wisdom and hidden pain. "I have built an empire, commanded respect across America, but I have never had someone simply hold my hand and treat me like a woman rather than a business transaction." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. The formal distance dissolved, replaced by genuine curiosity about each other. Mrs. Dorothy shared stories of building her business empire from nothing, starting with a small catering business in Alabama and eventually owning hotels, tech companies, and real estate across the country. She spoke of the loneliness that came with success, of the men who had tried to use her wealth throughout her life, and of the racism and sexism she had faced as a black woman in business. Jamal spoke about his dreams beyond survival, his desire to maybe start his own business, his hopes for his sister's future, his fears about whether he was strong enough to be the man his family needed. He shared his experiences with racial profiling, the stress of being a young black man trying to survive in America, and his determination to break generational cycles of poverty. As dawn approached, both of them had discovered something unexpected, a real connection that transcended their unusual circumstances. But the mystery of the locked room still haunted Jamal's thoughts. 3 days later, while Mrs. Dorothy was traveling to New York for a board meeting, Jamal decided to investigate. The house was quieter than usual, with minimal staff around. He made his way to the forbidden second floor. The door was slightly ajar, unusual for such a heavily secured area. Jamal's heart pounded as he pushed it open slowly. The room was like a shrine to memories. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades, business documents, newspaper clippings, and personal letters. But what caught his attention was a collection of framed photographs on the central table. In one photo, a younger version of his father, Marcus Washington, stood arm in arm with a much younger Mrs. Dorothy. They were both smiling, looking deeply in love. The photo was dated 1985, 40 years ago. Jamal's hands trembled as he picked up more photographs. His father and Mrs. Dorothy at various locations around the country, at business events, in intimate settings that clearly showed a romantic relationship. There were love letters in his father's handwriting, promising marriage and a future together. "So you finally discovered the truth." Jamal spun around. Mrs. Dorothy stood in the doorway, having returned earlier than expected. There was no surprise in her eyes, no anger, only the calm expression of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "This marriage," Jamal said, his voice shaking with realization, "it was never about helping me. It was about revenge on my father." Mrs. Dorothy entered the room slowly, closing the door behind her. "You're more perceptive than I expected, Jamal. I thought it would take you longer to piece everything together. Jamal felt betrayed and used. You exploited my desperation. You used my family's suffering as an opportunity to get back at a dead man. Listen carefully, young man, Mrs. Dorothy said, her voice carrying the weight of 4 decades of pain. I loved your father with everything I had. We met when I was 45 and he was 35. I had already lost my first husband to Vietnam and built my business empire from nothing. Marcus was different. He saw me as a woman, not just a wealthy widow to be exploited. She picked up one of the photographs, her fingers tracing the image of his father's face. For 5 years, we planned our future together. He helped me expand my business nationally. I trusted him with my heart, my body, my financial secrets. When I proposed marriage, he humiliated me publicly, claiming he could never marry someone so much older, that people would think he was a gold digger. Jamal sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the revelation. That day, I swore that if I couldn't have Marcus Washington, I would have his blood. When I learned he had a son, I began planning. I've been watching your family for years, waiting for the right moment when you would be desperate enough to accept my proposal. So everything, the timing, the offer, the marriage, it was all calculated revenge? It was supposed to be, Mrs. Dorothy admitted. I wanted you to sign over any inheritance rights, make you completely dependent on me, then reveal the truth and watch you suffer as I suffered. She paused, moving to the window that overlooked the Hollywood Hills. But something unexpected happened, Jamal. Your character, your integrity, the way you've treated me with genuine respect and kindness, it awakened something in me that I thought had died 40 years ago. Jamal looked up at her, confusion replacing his anger. Your father used me and discarded me when I was no longer convenient. But you married me under difficult circumstances and still found ways to show me dignity and humanity. You broke through 40 years of hardened hatred with simple kindness. Tears began flowing down her cheeks. I am now imprisoned by the very love I thought I had lost forever. My revenge has turned into genuine affection. I am no longer your captor, Jamal. I have become captive to your goodness. Jamal stood up and walked to her. Despite everything, the deception, the manipulation, the years of planning, he found himself feeling compassion for this woman who had carried such pain for so long. Mrs. Dorothy, he said gently, I forgive you. Your heart was broken, and broken people sometimes make choices that hurt others. But I can see that your heart has healed. The woman I've gotten to know these past weeks, that's who you really are. Mrs. Dorothy broke down completely, sobbing like the young woman she had been 40 years earlier. Can you really forgive me after everything I've done? After the lies and manipulation? Jamal took her hands in his. What matters now is not how we began, but who we choose to be going forward. You could have continued with your revenge, but instead, you chose to love. That takes courage. From that day forward, their relationship transformed completely. The deception was replaced by transparency, the manipulation by mutual respect. Mrs. Dorothy began teaching Jamal about business, gradually involving him in managing parts of her empire. Their marriage, which had begun as a transaction, evolved into a genuine partnership. 6 months later, during the winter holidays, Mrs. Dorothy fell seriously ill. The best doctors in Los Angeles and New York were flown in, but her condition continued to deteriorate. In her final weeks, she made Jamal the sole heir to her vast empire, but more importantly, she had found peace. I have no regrets, she told him as she lay in the private hospital suite. Your love healed 40 years of bitterness. I can leave this world knowing that forgiveness is real, that people can change, that love is stronger than revenge. When Mrs. Dorothy passed away, the entire business community of America mourned. At her funeral, Jamal stood with the photograph from that hidden room and said, "Dorothy, I forgive you. Please forgive yourself too. Your love in the end was pure." But the story doesn't end there. Aisha, who had been Mrs. Dorothy's trusted assistant and had grown close to Jamal during the months of his wife's illness, began spending more time with him as he navigated his new responsibilities. Their friendship, built on mutual respect and shared experiences of being young black professionals in predominantly white business spaces, gradually blossomed into love. A year later, Jamal married Aisha in a beautiful ceremony that honored both his first wife's memory and his newfound happiness. The Beverly Hills mansion, once filled with secrets and hidden pain, became a home filled with laughter, love, and the sounds of family. Jamal's mother and sister moved into the mansion, where they received the best care and education money could provide. His mother's diabetes was managed by the best specialists, and Keisha graduated from Howard with honors and landed a prestigious job at a Fortune 500 company. The empire that Mrs. Dorothy had built through decades of hard work and determination became the foundation for Jamal's new life, but also for his commitment to helping other struggling black families across America. From this story, we learn that love has the power to transform even the deepest hatred and bitterness. Mrs. Dorothy entered the marriage seeking revenge, but Jamal's genuine kindness and respect changed her heart completely. The woman who wanted only to cause pain ultimately became a prisoner of the very love she thought she had lost forever. This story teaches us that forgiveness, understanding, and treating others with dignity can heal even the oldest wounds. Many times we enter relationships with hidden agendas or past hurts, but when we choose to love authentically, we often find ourselves changed in ways we never expected. What began as calculated revenge became Jamal's greatest blessing, and in the heart of someone who only knew bitterness, true love was reborn. So friends, if this emotional and meaningful story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share this video, and subscribe to our channel so that more inspiring stories of love, forgiveness, and transformation can reach you. Remember, in life, it's not how relationships begin that matters most, but how we choose to nurture them with genuine love and respect.